Hi, welcome everybody to Naturally Speaking with Jess Mullins and Patricia Simpson. We're going to get started in just a few minutes past 6 o'clock to give people time to finish their dinners and get home from work. So go ahead and grab some water, use the restroom, get cozy, and we'll get started really soon. Welcome, folks. If you just joined us, we're going to get started in just a few minutes past 6 o'clock to give people time to get home from work. Go ahead and grab some water, get comfortable, and we'll get started in just a few minutes. Thank you. Is this where I should be playing Flight of the Bumblebee to entertain people? Better than the Jeopardy music, that's for sure. If you just joined us and are itching to get started, I wanted you to go ahead and put your name in the chat. And one thing that you love about either bees or plants. Don't be shy. Patricia and Jess, this goes for you too. Oh, chat is disabled. Okay. Thanks for letting me know, Craig. You put that in the Q&A. Dan, could you maybe look at enabling the chat for folks?
I will try.
Yeah, that's interesting. One way we can get around that, of course, is you have questions for Jess and Patricia. You actually can put that in the Q&A box, like Craig did, to let us know the chat was disabled.
It's
Oh,
working now.
Patty. Okay, perfect. Working. Awesome. Thanks, folks, for letting us know. So again, as we're waiting just another minute or so for folks to log on, why don't you go ahead and put your name in the chat and something that you really like about either bees or plants. And for those of you who just logged on, we're just giving people a few minutes here to get in the Zoom room and to get situated. So go ahead and grab some water and get comfortable, and we will get started in 1 minute. Patricia, ditto, fuzzy butts. Bee butts are so cute.
There's actually an Instagram page, I think, that just focuses on bee butts. I can't remember what the handle is, but it's just all they post is pictures of bee butts.
I am going to look that up as soon as we hang up tonight, because if anything is going to make you feel better after a hard day or a sad day, it's looking at fuzzy little bee butts.
Exactly.
Yes, Adam, when bees fall asleep in mellow flowers. I think you were the one who pointed that out to me, actually. Little sleeping bumblebees in the mellow flowers. So cute. Love it.
And on that note, there's actually a iNaturalist project for sleepy slumber parties for bees that gather together on blooms and sleep.
Oh,
I know, right?
I know. Nature is amazing and also adorable. You can appreciate nature for its scientific intricacy, and you can also appreciate how adorable it is sometimes. We have some great answers in the chat here, folks. We are going to get started though. Thank you so much for sharing what you love about bees and plants while we waited for folks to log on. Well, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. My name is Sam Wins. I'm going to be your host. I'm a scientist and science communicator out at Cabrillo National Monument. And tonight I'm really excited to introduce you to two amazing women who are doing incredible work out there promoting native biodiversity here in this incredible biodiverse place of San Diego County. But before we do that, we have just a few housekeeping items. So this is a webinar format, as you may have noticed. You're not going to be able to see the participants, only the hosts and the panelists, okay? That's normal. There's nothing wrong with your computer or with Zoom on your end. To ask questions, some of you had already found the Q&A button. It's either going to be, depending on your computer, at the top of your screen or down at the bottom. So you use that function. You can ask questions at any time. In fact, queue them up as they're talking so that you don't forget your question, right? And at the end, I'm going to read your questions aloud to our panelists, our speakers today, for them to answer. And you can also use the chat function, now that we've enabled it, to answer any questions that Patricia and Jess may have for you as we go along, or even to chat amongst yourselves, right, as they are speaking. Please keep your mic muted. There's a lot of people on this call. It can get a little chaotic. And captions are available by clicking the closed caption icon either at the bottom of your Zoom screen or again at the top of your Zoom screen, depending on where your bar is. All right, and all that is to say, we're getting started here. I'm going to stop my share so that they can start sharing their screen. And without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce to you. First, I'll introduce Patricia. Patricia is a coworker of mine and just an amazing naturalist here in San Diego, one of the iNaturalist power users. I learn so much from her every day about plants and about insects and about San Diego's biodiversity. And so Patricia is now the vegetation technician at Cabrillo National Monument. And she has been doing some work alongside the incredible entomologist Jess Mullins, who is with the David Holway Lab at UCSD. And I'm going to let them speak on the work that they're doing and all the exciting stuff they have to share tonight. So without further ado, Jess and Patricia, please take it away.
Thank you for that introduction. I'll share my screen and let Patricia get started.
All right, welcome everybody. This is a lot of fun to have that. A little bit about myself. As Sam said, I am the vegetation technician at Cabrillo National Monument. What that means is that I do native plant propagation and habitat restoration at Cabrillo. Hopefully, most of you are aware that we have a greenhouse just outside of the park. But if not, we do. And we grow a lot of plants there. I am lucky to have a lot of volunteers there that are helping me. We do everything from seed collection in the park to growing the plants and planting them back into the field. This week we've been working on the road that leads to the lighthouse, and we've been putting a lot of new plants there. So if you're in the park, check it out. Oh, trying to advance my slide. It's not working. Oh, there it is. So I'm an avid naturalist. And what that means is I love to go out in the field and take photos of just about everything I can find and try to identify them. And for that, I use iNaturalist. I've been doing this since about 2015. And in 2016, I met the amazing Dr. Kenglu James Hung, who was and still is the bee specialist in San Diego. He's no longer in San Diego. He works outside, but he still is the person that has discovered the most amount of bees in San Diego County. And Jess is taking over and stepping in his footsteps and doing an amazing job. And with James, I started a project on iNaturalist called Bees of San Diego County to kind of keep track of the native bees here in San Diego and how they're doing and where they're found. And since 2021, with his help and with also Jess's help, we've been doing native bee surveys at Cabrillo National Monument. And I will be talking a little more about that later. But this is very exciting. We're hoping to learn a lot about the bees. If you want to advance, thank you.
All right. I'm Jess Mullins, and I'm currently a PhD student at UC San Diego in Dr. David Hallway's lab. And I joined in 2021 to study how land use change impacts which bees are found where in San Diego County. And I started my process in learning the very diverse bee fauna in San Diego on iNaturalist from a few states east in Colorado. So I've been lurking for a while, and I'm happy to be a part of it now. And I wanted to start today by talking about a bee that many of you are maybe familiar with. This is the bee that most people have heard of, and that's the Western honeybee, Apis mellifera. And it is prolific in Southern California, but it is not native to the Americas. It was introduced in the 1600s, but for wax, and then it became a very important pollinator for our crops, and it has also successfully moved into a lot of places, especially in Mediterranean climates. So this map shows us the exotic range in red and the native range in blue, purple, and the density of wild colonies, so not managed colonies, those living out free in Africa and Europe. And oftentimes we hear about bee decline, and this is the bee that comes to mind, but the managed colonies are maybe the ones that are at risk, but those living in the wild are not at risk. And to give you a sample of how prevalent they are, there's a really great iNaturalist project called Nesting Bees, and this also tracks nesting bees that are honeybees, unmanaged colonies. And just in North America, there are 3,500 observations of nests, and you can see they'll live inside of old power line poles, in water control boxes, and their prevalence is further shown by they're the third most observed organism in San Diego County. And a lot of people don't spend time staring at flowers looking for bugs, so that's how prevalent they are. People notice them enough to put them on iNaturalist. And an interesting pattern that Dr. James Hung noticed during his PhD at UC San Diego was not just their prevalence, but how often they're visitors of flowers. So this map shows different network studies. So that is just a big list of pollinators that visit plants. And the orange color shows the percentage of those flower visits are honeybees. And you'll see the most orange in Southern California, where we are, and also in other Mediterranean areas. So they're prolific floral visitors here, and they are directly correlated with the floral abundance. So if there are a lot of flowers, the honeybees have this amazing ability to communicate to their sisters, hey, there's a really delicious patch over here of flowers to eat. They do an amazing dance called the waggle dance, and all of their sisters go and forage. So if it's one flower that's out blooming by itself, maybe a honeybee will visit it, but not tell the world about it because there's not much to eat. But if it's like this photo is when Baccharis was in bloom in the fall, that was the only thing blooming and there was a lot of it. So there were lots of honeybees on it. And another thing that we hear a lot of with honeybees is about the Scutellata hybrid. So a lot of people often call this the Africanized honeybee, but the Scutellata hybrid is a more accurate term because the continent of Africa has many subspecies of honeybees, and the Scutellata hybrid was one that was brought to South America because it is more robust and less impacted by disease. And there has been concern since the 80s that it was moving north. And so Dr. Daniela Zarate, who was a PhD student at UC San Diego, studied the genomics of these bees. So basically what is their, she called her project 23andB, and she looked at the genome of all of the bees to see just what percentage of it was Scutellata hybrid. So you'll see each bar is the genome of one bee specimen, and from San Diego County, you'll see an admixture. So it's not just this Scutellata hybrid. It's a hybrid of also different genomes from around the globe. So that brings us into talking about what is a bee. And a bee is a vegetarian wasp. So in the early Cretaceous period, over 100 million years ago, these wasps that would visit flowers to collect thrips. So you gardeners here probably know and maybe don't greatly appreciate thrips visiting your flowers or living in your flowers, but these wasps would clean them up and take the thrips back to their nest to lay their egg on. And in the process, it slowly became advantageous that this pollen-covered thrip had a pretty delicious meal on it, and that was pollen. And that's when bees emerged to switch their diet to pollen. And bees, much like monarch butterflies, go through complete metamorphosis. They are adults that lay an egg with this pollen provision, and then they have several larval stages, a prepupa and a pupa. They overwinter underground, usually like this, and then they emerge as an adult and start the process all over again. And bees are so important because they are very efficient pollinators. There are many pollinators that are so important. Bees are special pollinators because they visit flowers specifically to collect pollen, while other pollinators visit flowers to drink nectar, and in the process, they get pollen on them. And 80% of flowering plants require animal pollination to reproduce. And without pollinators, a third of plant species would not be able to produce seeds at all. And half of the plant species would have a reduction in their fertility, so their offspring wouldn't be as fit. So knowing exactly how they're changing in response to land use change and climate change is crucial to promote their biodiversity and protect our ecosystems. And my favorite fact to talk to people about bees is that there are over 20,000 bee species globally, and we have just hit over 700 in San Diego County. So this is a very diverse area for bees, and they come in all shapes and forms and life history traits. So when I said I love the diversity of bees before the talk started, this is what I meant. I appreciate all of their forms and behaviors. And most bees are actually solitary. They don't have a queen or workers that they communicate with. They lay an egg in a nest, close it off, and they never meet their offspring. And some 13% of all bees are parasitic, and that means that a bee lays an egg in another bee's nest, and the parasite's egg hatches and eats the provision of the host, and that's their life cycle. And this picture, it looks like a wasp, but this is actually a bee following a mining bee into her nest to lay an egg, and she's a bit of a freeloader. And finally, social bees, which we've heard a lot of about with queens, workers, this organized caste of organized labor. That's only 9% of species. that said, because their colonies are so large, the abundance of these social species is high, particularly around the tropics. And most bees live underground. There are soil excavators like this chimney bee here, but there are also wood excavators that can dig holes in or build holes inside of wood. I see that commonly around palm trees around here. There are mason bees that will collect pebbles and mud and resin to build a little cell above ground. There are renters that will go to different cavities. And this is something Patricia will get into with not necessarily trimming everything in your garden because you're supporting bees. And then there are brood parasites that will nest above or below ground, depending on their host. And another trait that's very special about bees is some are very picky eaters and they will only visit one type of flower. So sometimes in only one family of plants, sometimes one genus to collect pollen. And then there are generalists. And you can see in this yellow-faced bumblebee, she stopped over at a flower that had yellow pollen and then went on later to collect purple pollen. So they aren't so picky. They will collect pollen from whatever's blooming. And more about the biodiversity hotspot that we live in, the California Floristic Province. We're in the southern part of it. There are 2,000 species of vascular plants, many of which need pollinators like bees, and 700 species of bees. And globally, this map shows you exactly where bees are most diverse, and the darker red color shows where there are more species of bees. So you can see that much of North America, especially here, is a biodiversity hotspot for bees. And biodiversity hotspots are a wonderful place to live, as we all know. It is also, the term biodiversity hotspot is not a badge of honor. It is not just the number of endemic species and the number of species as a whole, but is also the number of species that are threatened. So they must be prioritized for conservation efforts. And that's how the term biodiversity hotspot was formed. And that's particularly prevalent here because we've seen land use change happen rapidly in San Diego. And here's some historic aerial imagery of San Diego County. This is Lake Murray. And keep an eye on these yellow boxes to see what happens. And this is imagery from 2022. So this has all been developed and created fragmented areas of land. And even though this plant community is very similar to what's found here, I'll get into what Dr. James Hung's research found, that they do not host the same type of bee species and certainly not the same numbers of bee species. And land use change is one of the #1 drivers of biodiversity loss globally. And that's exactly what James Hung came here to do his PhD on. And he found at these 14 sites spread across San Diego, some very clear patterns that in these darker boxes represent large reserves like Mission Trails or Cabrillo National Monument, had a higher diversity of bees and also a higher diversity of these traits that I talked about. So sociality, diet, where they nest. And these fragments, despite having the same plant community, had lower both functional diversity and species diversity. And that's where I come in. My big question as a PhD student is, why is this happening after Dr. James Hung demonstrated this very clear pattern? And one of the main things that I'm interested in is looking at the range size. So in this biodiversity hotspot, we have a large number of endemic species and species that will only live in very small areas, such as this red-tailed micro-short face bee here. This is the only area in the world that this species of bee is found, versus this tripart sweat bee is found all over Western North America. And my thought is that these bees that have a more flexible living strategy will be more they won't be as susceptible to land use change. And that is what our data shows so far. So this is another figure similar to the ones you saw earlier, but with species richness, so number of species on the y-axis and year that we sampled. And reserves are in green and fragments are in gray. And we found that there are more of these range restricted species like the micro short-faced bee in reserves versus the fragments. So we see that bees that are endemic are the first to drop out in response to land use change. And maybe part of the reason is due to their pollen requirements. And to think about how much pollen is needed to support native bees versus honeybees, some scientists in Utah calculated just how much pollen is needed. So here is a honeybee with a full load of pollen, and 6 of these pollen pellets are estimated to needed to create 1 solitary bee. And this really demonstrates the size difference in a honeybee versus a solitary bee. Of course, they're not always so extreme. And the estimate was that 1 honeybee colony takes 650,000 of these pellets from 1 hectare per year. And that's equivalent to 110,000 solitary bees. So there hasn't been a lot of research to directly measure competition between honeybees and native bees, but we know that resources could be limiting for them. And that's something that Dr. Dylan Travis found by looking at 3 of our native plants, white sage, black sage, and scorpion weed. And in these 3 plants, he selected a stem of flowers and he cross-pollinated them himself, or he self-pollinated them himself with a paintbrush, or he let a non-honeybee pollinate it, or he just left it open. And for all of these species, except for black sage, what I'll get into, he found that the fitness of the plant, so basically how large the seed was after it was pollinated and how large of a plant grew from that seed that was planted, those that were self-pollinated and honeybee pollinated were less fit versus it being cross-pollinated by hand or pollinated by a native bee. And this NA here for non-apis with black sage is because he collected his data during a severe drought and there were no non-apis bees to be seen. So I will pass it on to Patricia to talk more about native bees.
Did we lose Patricia?
Not sure.
Patricia, you're muted right now. And your camera is also turned off. Maybe she had to run to the restroom really quickly. And it happens to be right when you're ending.
Okay.
Hope everything's okay. Could be her computer's frozen. Well, let's go ahead and answer. Let's see if we can answer some of these questions here while we wait for Patricia to get back online. Gary had the question of what would be the best quick fact a park volunteer could tell visitors about the bees at Cabrillo National Monument. What do you think, Jess?
I would, this slide is the first thing that came to my mind actually. And that is that a bee that was, that is endemic to San Clemente Island, that means it's only on San Clemente Island and it has red hair like the bee that you see, was found at Cabrillo National Monument. And we have no idea why, if it just blew over or what, but Patricia found it. So it's pretty exciting.
That is really exciting. And in fact, there is some great communication pieces about this. I know Patricia is about to speak on this, but Gary, circle back with me and there's a beautiful story map that you can point people to if they want to learn more about this bee. And, they weren't here at this talk tonight, for instance. Okay, so perfect. I think, Patricia, are you back with us?
I am back. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you, I can hear you, and I'm going to
Okay.
let you take it away when you're ready.
I do not know why, but I've lost all control on my side. So Jess, if you can assist me in advancing through the slides as we go along, that would be great.
Okay.
Let's learn about what we see in terms of bees and in terms of plants at Cabrillo National Monument. So as Jess mentioned, at Cabrillo National Monument, we actually did a survey, not a survey, a BioBlitz in 2020, and we found these Anthophora urbana clementina, which is a species, a subspecies that's seen only on San Clemente Island normally. And we found a population on the coastal area at Cabrillo National Monument. On these two pictures here, you can see below is the very monochromatic mainland version of that species, which is the urbane digger bee. And the San Clemente version of that subspecies is very much red or orange. So it is very distinguishable from the mainland species. Next. So we decided after this discovery to start bee surveys at Cabrillo National Monument. And it was also a perfect time to see how we could engage the community and use community science to do these surveys. Normally, the way the surveys are done for monitoring bee species are collecting bees and euthanizing them and looking at them under a microscope to be able to identify them to species. So it's a fairly invasive technique, basically, to the bee population. So we're trying to figure out ways to change that completely. And we have a wonderful team of photographers that are surveying at Cabrillo National Monument on several transects. And we have a team of scientists also for the last 3 years that have been doing the same thing in collecting bees in order to identify them to species. Those collections are going to be stopping at this point, but the photography surveys are going to be ongoing for as long as we can do them. And we're hoping to learn a lot about that. So that's really using community science as a way to monitor bee populations. Next. So since then, we've been cataloging the plant phenology of the park on these segments, on these 4 segments of the park, and also the native bee phenology. So the photographers go out and they go out for 2 hours and they record every plant that is in bloom, and they record all the bees that they can, all the native bees that they can find. So we know when plants are blooming. We're starting to know when bees are emerging, which species are emerging and when they're emerging. Sometimes it may have to do with the weather or some weather events. Could be the time of year. It could be whether or not their favorite plant is out or not. We're learning how long they are active for. Some bees are only active in the spring. Some bees are only active during the summer. Some of them are very happy to be around in the wintertime. We're learning that not all species are being seen every year. Sometimes on drought years, we don't see certain species. We're learning about their plant preferences and their behavior, their nesting behavior, mating behavior, and the relationship between different species. Next. So the best way really to support native bees is to plant native plants. I don't think I'm teaching anybody anything by saying that. Of course, you know, my specialty is plants, but I have such a love for bees, and I've been going around the park taking a lot of photos of bees. So that's what you're going to be seeing. You're going to be seeing a lot of bee photos and a few plants that I'm going to be featuring. We're going to go through the year starting in January all the way to the fall of the following year. So what you want to do really for supporting the bees is to really have a wide diversity of plant in your yard. You don't have to have only natives. You can have other ornamental plants, but you really want a big variety. Difference in sizes of flowers, of shape of flowers, colors of flowers, and a difference in when they bloom. You want, if you possible, have blooms year round to support all bee species. Next. I'm going to start with the lemonade berry, which can get a bad rep just because it gets so big, especially at Cabrillo National Monument. You've all seen those hillsides covered with lemonade berry. So you can imagine if you plant a lemonade berry in your yard, is it going to take over your yard? Possibly, but I'm here to tell you that you can actually plant a lemonade berry and tame it. You can trim it so that it looks like a little tree. I've done some of that around the visitor center. There were some very wild lemonade berries, and I have trimmed them so they look like a little shrub, basically, or a little tree. You can sculpt them the way you want, so they can be tamed. And they are actually very important for bees at this time of year because there's not a whole lot of things blooming right now. The spring, our San Diego spring is just starting, even though it's still winter. We're starting to see blooms, but there's not a big abundance of things out there. But the lemonade berry is out there and it's blooming and it's attracting a lot of bees. Some of them are comfortable with colder weather, like mining bees and bumblebees. But there's also little bees out there that like to be around and like to enjoy the small flowers of lemonade berries. Next. The sea dahlia. It's a favorite at Cabrillo National Monument, of course. So the sea dahlia is in the sunflower family. And all the flowers in the sunflower family, the disc that you see inside, what we think of as the flower, the center, and then the petals radiating from there, the center is really a collection of flowers. So in that center, because the sea dahlia is so big, can you still see me? Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, good. Sorry, my screen disappeared all of a sudden, so I'm back. So the all these collection of little flowers, there's a lot on a sea dahlia, and the bees are able to eat from all these single flowers. So there's a lot of food on a single flower, or on, I should say, a head of a sunflower or of a sea dahlia. They're very big, they're very showy. They're very easy to maintain in a yard. Once you have sea dahlias, they'll keep coming back year after year, unless the gophers eat the roots. That's another problem, but that's okay. And again, a lot of variety of bees. All these photos are photos that I have taken. Probably 95% of them are at Cabrillo National Monument, certainly for the sea dahlia here. They're all from Cabrillo. Small bees, big bees, very different species out there are really enjoying the sea dahlia. And if we go to the next slide, we can also see that the sea dahlia is a great place for bees to hang out. One very fun thing about native bees is that they like to, some of them like to hang on petals or on stems using just their mandibles. They don't use their legs, they just clip the petals or the stem with their mandibles and they just hang there. Sometimes they sleep that way. So this was a little, on a coastal trail, a little cellophane cuckoo bee that was just swaying in the wind, preening itself, just hanging on to that petal right there. Very cute. Still on the coastal trail, there was a sleepy bee slumber party of these longhorn bees that were sleeping on a wilted head of a sea dahlia. but that coloring provided perfect camouflage for these longhorn bees to just hang there and sleep there. It was early in the morning, it was still cold, and they were all sleeping on that flower head, just happy to hang there. And just last year, there were a lot of these short-faced bees still on the coastal trail that were just sleeping in the morning on the sea dahlia flowers. Not a very good camouflage for them, but that's okay. They were very happy to be there, and that's one of their favorite flowers to forage from. So they love that.
Patricia, may I
next.
ask a
Yeah.
clarifying question right now?
Yes, absolutely.
And this is from one of the listeners here.
Mhm.
They're wondering if we are looking at a wintering species right now. So sea dahlia bloom in the wintering, in the winter. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
When you say wintering species, what do you mean?
I just mean when they're blooming.
Oh yeah, they're
when these
blooming. We're
plants are
going
blooming.
through the years. So the sea dahlias are just starting to bloom right now. The lemonade berry started earlier in January and is
Perfect.
going to keep blooming through March. And we're going to go through, and we're still moving through the year. So if we go to the next one, we are at the bladder pod. And if you've been around the park lately, it's just barely starting. We're talking more so in March, we're probably going to see more blooms of the bladder pod. But the amazing thing that we've learned from actually our bee surveys is that some bladder pod plants, like a single plant, can stay in bloom for up to 8 months. And that was absolutely mind-blowing for me to see that. I had just never noticed that a plant could stay in bloom for so long. It doesn't happen every year, but we've on one of the drought years that we had a single plant on the coastal trail that was in bloom the entire time we did the surveys from March to September. So that was pretty mind-blowing. The bladder pod is one of these whimsical plants. It might not smell the best. It kind of smells like skunk if you rub against it. But it's actually such a beautiful plant and has very sweet nectar. So a lot of bees love to go in there. There's also ants sometimes that like to go and collect the nectar from these plants. But the anthers of bladder pod are perfect for little tiny bees. You can see on the right-hand side right there, a metallic sweat bee, very small, and it's the perfect size. It's the exact same size as the anther, so it's the perfect size for it. For the larger bees, they will, if you want to go to the next slide, for the larger bees, a lot of the time they will go directly and sip the nectar inside the conical flower. But some of the other bees will also go to the anthers. They get creative. You can see that sweat bee at the very bottom there, that black sweat bee is just wrapping itself all around the anther right there. A beautiful plant to have. Next. So we're moving on now to May, June. In May, you're going to have the dahlias that are going to start blooming. The ladyfinger on the right is going to be blooming a little later than the others, but probably more so in June. But in May, you're going to start seeing the two others. One of the favorite, the chalk dahlia. It is beautiful early on in the spring, and then it blooms, and then the plant itself will start to wilter and fade away. So it's not, I don't consider it an evergreen, so it's not necessarily the best for the garden, but it does have a spectacular bloom and it attracts a lot of insects and hummingbirds. But so does the landsleaf dahlia, and the landsleaf dahlia is more of an evergreen. That plant is going to be beautiful all year round, and then bloom at around the same time as well. Next. So some of the bees that you're going to see on the dahlias, again, some bees are going to be very, very small. They will actually go all the way inside the flower and completely disappear. You don't see them. They bathe in there and then come out. And then you have bees that have much longer tongues, like the digger bee, that will just hover at the opening of the flower and get their nectar or pollen from there. Next. The toyon. The toyon is another favorite of mine and of just about anybody actually in San Diego. That's probably my favorite shrub. In around Christmas time, of course, you know, there's red berries and green leaves, you know, it's just absolutely gorgeous. But it also has the particularity of blooming a little later in June or July. So you will be seeing some a lot of bees that are enjoying the small flowers. One of my favorite bees to see on toyons is the roost fairy bee. That's going to be on the right hand side there. You can see little the little male on the back there who's following the female. I have toyons here at my house and I see these bees. I have hundreds of these bees of the rose fairy bee. They're just absolutely adorable. They're difficult to see because they're very, very small. They look more so like gnats if you're not really paying attention. But if you have toyons in your yard, or if you're going around the park at a time where we have beautiful toyons around the visitor center, do pay close attention to them, and then you'll start seeing those little tiny bees. Very cute. And it is a bird magnet. It actually feeds the birds in the wintertime, so it's absolutely an incredible plant to have for biodiversity in your yard. It attracts insects and it attracts birds. This is possibly one of the most beautiful birds here that we see in San Diego County, and is here only in the winter time, and that's the cedar waxwing. And they absolutely gobble up the toyon palms. They just love those. Next. The chaparral bushmallow. As Adam said, it's great to see bees sleep in those little flowers, sometimes early in the morning when that plant is in bloom, which is going to be in July, August. It's a summer bloomer. You can actually find little bees sleeping in the bushmallow flowers. The other particularity about the bushmallow is that it attracts one of our specialist bees, the Ocraceous chimney bee. That bee will only visit chaparral bushmallow. It does not visit any other plants. And that happens for other bees and other plants that are at the park that are very, very picky about the plants they love. So that's one of them right there. And it's a beautiful bee. If you can see the eyes, the blue eyes there, oof, and the fuzziness of it, you just want to cuddle with it. Next. California buckwheat. Again, that's another summer bloomer. Very important for later in the summer. Now you're having all the annuals that were out in the spring, and the early spring blooms have faded away. So we're entering a time where we don't have a lot of variety of blooms in the middle of the summer. A lot of our plants go dormant in the summertime, but that's when the California buckwheat decides to bloom, and as a result, it attracts quite a few bees. It has very small flowers. The anthers are absolutely beautiful. There's little pink anthers. It has yellow pollen. If you look at the legs of these bees, some of the legs of these bees, the pollen is actually yellow. For a long time, people thought the pollen was probably pink because of the anther color, but no, it is yellow. And a lot of bees rely on that. If you go to the next slide, that's how many bees like the California buckwheats. A lot of diversity of species. Again, when blooms of other things are more scarce, they start really relying on those power plants. That's what I like to call them, arriving at the end of the summer and then going into the fall. We're really looking at plants that really sustain our that are really essential to sustain our pollinators. And on that note, let's go to the next slide. The golden bush. So I kind of put golden bush and bacchus, broom bacchus in the same boat because they bloom at around the same time. But I find that golden bush attracts a lot of bees, a lot of variety of bees. There's, if you look on the right-hand side on the top there, the leafcutter bees, they have the particularity of collecting pollens on their belly. This one is particularly proud of its belly. It has a lot of pollen on there. It's quite impressive. So the bush mallow is going to be blooming in the fall, starting in September, October, November. So it's one of these really late season bloomers, and it will attract a great diversity of pollinators. If you go to the next one. Again, a lot of different species. This is one of the plants that we found, our San Clemente urbane digger bee in a coastal area. That was a plant that it visited. That was actually a plant it collected pollen from, which sort of confirmed that we had a population at the park because that's a behavior that a female would exhibit before laying eggs. So possible nesting behavior. And again, a lot of variety of bees on these flowers. The metallic sweat bee in the very center that has a red abdomen, that is the only plant I've seen this bee on. I think it goes on other, it's not a specialist per se, but because of the maybe the time of year that it emerges at, the golden bush is definitely a favorite for that bee. All right, next. The last one, again, talking about fall. This almost goes all the way to December, the wire lettuce. Now, I'm talking about the wire lettuce today because it's one of the most overlooked plant out there. It is an annual plant, so it's very rare for annual plants to bloom that late in the season. It has a very ugly spring, summer phase. If you look on the bottom left, it looks like a weed, really. It's a very weedy plant. But then it's kind of like the ugly duckling. It grows into this beautiful, whimsical plant. Sometimes it's closer to the ground and sometimes it's taller. It's very difficult to take a picture of that plant as a whole because you can see right through it. The branching is very sparse, and the flowers are little snowflakes basically on this branching. It's one of the, that's probably the second most popular plant at the park after the Shaw's agave. When the Shaw's agave is in bloom, everybody's asking me about the Shaw's agave. When this is in bloom, everybody asks me about it and stops me and says, what is this plant? This magical plant. So it's a little bit of a shame that you can't really find this plant in nurseries. I haven't been able to find it, at least. I'm hoping that people are going to be paying more attention to it. And one of the reasons for that is, next slide, bees. This is the plant I see the most amount of bee diversity on. So if everybody could plant some Stephanomeria or wire letters in their backyard, we'd be supporting an amazing array of bees. And when I say it's very popular, I mean it's very popular. Next slide. It's very popular. It's incredible. It's like, it's almost as if, you know, you'd want to say, okay, what species does not like Stephanomeria? And it'd be a shorter answer. It is one of the most popular plants for bees out there. Next. So another thing that you can do in your backyard, these are just a few tips, is to keep some bare soil for your nesting bees. There is often one of the most popular questions that I get is there a native ground cover, year-round ground cover that I can put in my backyard? And the short answer is no. We have some seasonal ground covers, yeah, in San Diego, but like a year-round ground cover, not really, not a native one. And it's okay, because guess what? Bees need bare soil in order to nest. So it's okay if you have bare soil in your yard in between your stepping stones. You're actually supporting bee biodiversity by leaving it be. Leaving be. All right, next. Also, be careful when you're trimming. Jess was talking about the pebble bees earlier. You may find those structures on your branches. So just look at your branches before you cut. And pebble bees can also be on structures. In this case, that's on a window frame. So if you see something like this, just know that, you know, before you start trying to wipe it out and clean it up, this may be actually a very interesting bee that lives there, the pebble bees. Also, with the stems of the annual plants that I have in my backyard, not only Stephanomeria, which is the stem that's on the right here, but with other types of stems, I tend to cut the flowers at the very top, and then I leave the stems in place. And that allows bees, like the small carpenter bee, to actually find home in those stems. There's a lot of other insects that love to bury in those stems. So that's a good thing, to just not get rid of everything, of all the brush that you have in your yard, and just leave some of that be for everybody. Next. So you can help by, you can do some research if you would like with the San Diego or the San Diego chapter of the California Native Plant Society. They're a great resource for plants. They have events and lectures throughout the year. And also a few nurseries that we have here in San Diego, Native West, they just opened a store for that's not wholesale. They used to be a wholesale nursery, but now they actually have a store for people, for individuals. Moosa Creek, which is a little further, but Moosa Creek, you can actually go on their website and see what they have, the availability that they have, and send them an email and tell them which nursery you would like to them to ship the plants to, and they will actually ship them there, and you can pick it up from your local nursery. And then there's also Neil's Nursery. I've never been there, but I've heard great things. It's a small nursery in Encinitas as well. And Jess, if you want to take it over.
All right, so more ways to help is to document what you see. And my favorite way to do that is with the app iNaturalist. There are lots of folks around in San Diego who love to do this, so you might meet a friend out on the trail. And it's an app that you can put on your phone, and you can take pictures of what you see, upload it, and identify it yourself with the AI, and then have experts come and confirm. And you're adding to what we know about biodiversity. So it's fun for you, and it benefits what we know about biodiversity. And another way to help, maybe it's like tomorrow and it might rain, and you want to still help with documenting biodiversity, you can help digitize museum records. So there's this great project called Notes from Nature, Big Bee Bonanza, And they take these pictures of their specimens and all of the labels, and you get to type in all of the information that's found on the label, and then that record goes up on a map to these big data aggregators that tell us which species are found where. And to give you an idea of how important that work is, this is a map that shows where there are records of specimens that have been digitized, and all of the areas that are white are areas where there are no digitized records. So maybe some of them, there are specimens just waiting on Notes from Nature for you to digitize. And the most important thing is to keep learning about bees. My favorite starting point is to go to this virtual museum exhibit, Museum of the Earth. If you just Google Museum of the Earth and bees, it will pop right up, and it will tell you everything and more you ever wanted to know about bees. And some of my favorite books, Bees in Your Backyard. This is a really great guide with tons of beautiful photos of bees to help you learn about their life history and how to find them. The Solitary Bees is kind of a textbook and teaches you all about the nitty-gritty of solitary bees. Bees of the World is a great book, and it's kind of a coffee table book. There are some amazing photos to just put out and on your coffee table and oogle at. And if you would like a novel about what it's like to be out in the field as a field biologist, Dave Golson has written a number of them, and A Sting in the Tail is one of my favorites. And thank you, and we would love to take any questions. And Patricia and I compiled a list of resources for you to keep learning about bees, so you can scan this code, and we can also send the link in the chat for you to see a long list of all of those things. So thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Patricia and Jess. That was really informative. I also love how proactive you are with giving people resources to learn more and also to help, because that's always one of the #1 questions, right? Is how can we help? So thank you so much for that advice. I learned a lot tonight. And I know you've been answering questions just kind of as we've been going along. So currently, I don't think we have any questions in the Q&A. We do have to log off in just a few minutes, but if folks have any last minute questions they'd like to put either in the chat or in the Q&A, now is your time to do so. And before we log off, while you're maybe thinking of that last question and typing it out, I'd like to kind of end here with a fun question. Jess, what is your favorite bee or plant or both, and why?
My favorite bee is a wool carder bee. And I had a fun experience watching a male protect his patch of flowers in the field once, and just watching this behavior of a bee that the male doesn't even have a sting, and that gets at a question that someone asked earlier, and he doesn't really have anything to fight with, but he scares all of these big wasps away with their sting. So I really enjoy them. So wool carder bees in the genus Anthidium, they're my favorite.
That is amazing. Does he, what does he do to scare them away? He doesn't have a stinger, so.
He flies at them really quickly, and he kind of, can make a sound with his wings that is kind of like a loud hum that's big and like, get out of my way.
That's awesome. Yeah, he's puffing up. Like, come at me, bro. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. That's fabulous. Okay, Patricia, same question for you. Favorite bee, favorite plant?
It's just not fair.
Both or why? I know. Just choose one that you love. It doesn't have to be your all-time favorite. Just your favorite tonight.
Well, you know, I'm gonna say that one of my favorite bee is the that San Clemente bee that I found at Cabaret National Monument, just because of the monumental search we had to do to, you know, or research we had to do to figure out whether or not we had a population. You know, once I found that bee, it was pretty amazing. And I had the opportunity that year. There was a lot of wire letters out there, so we really had to look at a lot of wire letters, and found an incredible amount of bees on these very late blooming plants. And that was absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to go with these two, Stefano Maria, wire lettuce, and the San Clemente bee.
That's wonderful. You have a personal connection to that bee.
Yes.
Alyssa wants to know if this is recorded. Alyssa, it is in fact being recorded, and that will be up on Cabrillo's website as well as Cabrillo National Monument Foundation's website once we get that captioned. We won't be sending that out, the recording out, but you can look for it on our website momentarily in just a few days, right? Should be up. Likewise, I did want to mention that, that famous bee biologist that we were talking about, the entomologist, Dr. James Hung. We did a Naturally Speaking with him a while back, and that is also recorded and put up on our website, which you can access now. So if you want to keep learning about native bees, that's one of the resources that you can go ahead and refer to now. I want to join everyone here tonight and thank you so much for your expertise and your time. And thank you all for attending tonight's talk. There will be another one of these talks at the end of February. I don't have the title yet, but we've got Kay London talking about the wildlife of San Diego County, which I'm very excited about. And so stay tuned, look for on the website for when the information of when that will be. And we hope to see you then. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Take care now.